Probably all heard of the classic 1962 film Lawrence of Arabia, but do you know who the real Lawrence of Arabia was? Middle Eastern scholar and retired history professor Ray Ajemian is making a presentation at the Thomas Crane Public Library on March 17th just to that topic. And Ray, first of all, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming over.
It's great to be back.
Really appreciate it. And interesting topic as well. As I mentioned, a lot of folks are familiar with, Peter O'Toole, Omar Sharif,
right.
Lawrence of Arabia, classic. I think it won an Academy Award.
It did.
Yeah.
Won many awards, yeah.
But before we talk about that, let's learn a little bit about yourself.
Well, I became interested in Lawrence from the movie, when the movie came out. And then I started reading about him. And eventually I went in more in detail and I started collecting books by and about him. And it just sort of blossomed into an interest in the man. He's a fascinating person.
So it was real. There was a real Lawrence of Arabia.
He was known as, well, his real name is T.E. Lawrence, Thomas Edward Lawrence. He was born in England. His father had 5 sons, and his father ran away with the governess, and the 5 boys were born to the governess.
Oh,
so
okay.
he wasn't. They mentioned in the movie that he wasn't legitimate,
right?
And which was true.
Okay.
But his father was a lord. He was a Sir Lawrence, and Lawrence simply became very much interested in, obviously he was very intelligent. He became interested in archaeology. When he was at Oxford, he became interested in the castles, and he, by bicycle, roamed Europe looking at castles. And then he went to the Middle East and started just wandering the Middle East. This is prior to World War I, looking at castles there. And it actually was he almost died. He was almost killed by a robber when he was there. And he came back and wrote his thesis on Crusader castles, which is a book now.
Oh, okay.
The original editions are expensive.
Yeah.
And that's how he got his degree. He extremely intelligent. He knew obviously English, French, German, Greek.
Wow.
Latin. He also knew Arabic. He was fluent in Arabic, and some Turkish also.
Okay.
So he was a brilliant man, and he ended up going to an archaeology dig in Kardemiş, which is now southern Turkey. And there he met a number of other archaeologists, and long story short, he became involved in wandering the area. That's where he picked up Arabic, learned more about the Arabic way of life, the Arabs' way of life. And eventually went on a sort of expedition to, supposedly an archaeology expedition, but it was really a mapping expedition for the British government.
Okay.
Because they sensed that things could go wrong. This is prior to the World War I again.
Right.
World War I came about, and he was, because of his background, he was assigned, he entered the military. And he was assigned to Cairo, and he was just doing intelligence work there, mapping and so forth. And then in 1916, the Arab Revolt broke out, and Lawrence and a number of people up higher in the chain than he did considered the fact that maybe the British should work with the Arabs, because the Turks were Turkey. Long story; it's very complicated. Turkey controlled the whole area. But they also allied themselves with Germany during World War I. And so if the Arabs are revolting against the Turks, this is good for the British.
Right. Yeah.
So long story short, Lawrence was sent to the Arab revolt area in Arabia. And that's where the whole thing really begins.
Okay. Where does your interest in this come? I mentioned you're a retired history teacher,
well,
a scholar in the Middle East. So what's your background, Ray?
My background was Middle Eastern history.
Okay, where?
At Michigan.
Okay.
And I'm Armenian, and just a number of things that led me to being interested in Lawrence. And he is a fascinating figure.
Yeah.
You have to understand that he, after all these years, he died in 1935 in a motorcycle accident.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, he was killed.
How ironic.
It starts out the movie starts out that way.
Yeah.
By the way, the movie it's a brilliant movie, but inaccurate in many respects.
It's a movie.
First of all, Lawrence was Peter O'Toole's like 6'1" or 6'2". Lawrence was 5'4", I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
So that in itself was a problem.
Yeah.
But no, Lawrence in the movie starts out with his death on the motorcycle, where he comes over a ridge and there are two boys on the motorcycle. He goes to get around them, and he goes off the road and dies.
Okay.
But my interest is the Middle East. I've always been interested in the Middle East.
So is this kind of a talk or a presentation you've given in other places?
I have done it a couple of times. I've started out by using, I did a presentation here on the Armenian genocide, and
Okay.
a year and a half ago, I don't know. And I just did on my own a thing on Lawrence, and I mentioned to people after the Armenian genocide, you want to do a Lawrence? And
Yeah.
So
And so you put it together?
So I put it together,
And
yeah.
here it is?
Yeah.
So what can folks expect? It's, again, March 17th, 7
Yeah.
to 8:30 p.m., which is there any significance to doing it at this time of year?
No,
Okay.
no, not really.
Okay.
No, it's your guy. You decided that.
Yeah.
No, he's just a figure that refuses to die in terms of interest.
Yeah.
I mean, there was an author. There is an author. He hasn't updated his book in maybe 15 years. Who's done a bibliography of books by and about Lawrence, and it's that thick.
Wow.
If you look at the last 5 or 6 years, there are more biographies that have come out about him. He just constant. There's the T. Lawrence Society in England. He never seems to go away. He's an enigma in many respects. A man who did a lot. At the same time, he seemed to back away from fame. Every time he became famous, he sort of backed away. In many ways, a mixed-up person. He wanted to be part of things, but he didn't want to be. Just to point out, when he died, he was maybe half a mile away from his little home, Cloud Hills in England.
No.
I went there once.
Yep.
If you ever go there, he had no running water, no electricity, a small place, and he was happy there.
Okay.
Just to be by himself
Yeah.
and write.
So was he poor? Would he be considered poor?
He wanted to be.
Yeah, okay.
When he came out of the military in World War I, he was a colonel in the Army, and he was high pay grade. He voluntarily went back to a private because he just didn't want the
limelight at all, it sounds
the
like.
perfect example. He became very famous because of Lowell Thomas, the American journalist,
Yes.
who caught on to Lawrence
Yes.
and
Yeah.
made an important man out of him.
Yeah.
He was going to be awarded by George V, the King of England, and Lawrence thought he was going to discuss the Arab issues
Yeah.
and so when he was before the King, and the King was going to award him this award, and he realized that it was just an award, he walked out.
Wow.
He walked away, and the King was left holding the...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He shamed the king in public?
He just walked away.
Wow.
That was just his his way of doing things.
So is this what you'll present?
Yeah, I'll mention it. I
Yeah.
mention that. There's so many things about him. I mean,
Yeah.
he's probably first known as a guerrilla war strategist because that's what made him famous. Leading and helping lead the Arabs during World War I against the Turkish train line, which went down from Damascus down to Medina. If you look at Saudi Arabia, that was their only link, was this train, and he continued with Arabs, of course, to break the line by blowing up bridges, blowing up track, and so forth. And
A spy? Could he be considered a spy?
He was considered a spy.
Yeah.
He had the Turks put
Bounty on him?
a bounty
Yeah.
on him. If Max Boot, I don't know if you've heard of Max Boot, is a historian today. He's basically a military historian, and he wrote about 7 or 8 years ago, a book on guerrilla warfare, on how guerrilla warfare has evolved over from the ancient times to modern times.
Right.
And Lawrence is in there.
Is that right?
As
Okay.
a man who helped develop certain strategies.
What's his name? Just the name Lawrence of Arabia is become kind of the slang vernacular when you're speaking
Yeah.
of somebody who's kind of, bigger than now, or just kind of omnipresent,
Well, also, as I'll mention in the video, then the PowerPoint,
Yeah.
he's also made fun of. I mean,
Yeah.
Mad Magazine, when it was around,
Oh, sure.
had
Yeah.
a copy, how do they put it? Florence of Arabia.
Florence. Yeah.
They made fun of, and people do make fun of it.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is he's well known as a military strategist, as a diplomat, because he helped try to, at the end of World War I, try to get the Arab states at Paris Peace Conference. As a writer, the Seven Pillars of Wisdom is the main book he wrote on the war, on his war efforts. So this is interesting. He wrote, there's a first edition book that was put out, but he also wrote before that a subscriber's edition with nice painted pictures in it. And only 200 copies, 220 copies.
Wow,
were
very
printed.
rare. Yeah.
And each copy was different.
Oh.
Bindings and whatever. Today, if you go online and you want to buy one from somebody that owns one, they run, I've seen run as high as $70,000
Is that right?
for one book.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not
They're
surprised.
they're
given the
they're
rarity.
collector's items.
Wow.
Yeah, they're really amazing.
So, at the end of your presentation, what do you most want folks to know about Lawrence of Arabia? What is it that you hope that they will take away from?
Good question.
From your talk.
He's just a fascinating person. A man who I think a lot of people can identify with, in that he was troubled in trying to find himself, I think.
Okay.
In doing so, he really was a man who was a forerunner in terms of the Middle East. And in other words, he argued that in order to, if you want to get people to, like Arabs, to support you, you have to be part of them in a sense.
Okay.
Just an example on that. If you look at, if you know, during the Iraq War, General Petraeus was, he studied Lawrence.
Okay.
And he admits it. I mean,
Interesting.
he did.
Right.
And Lawrence talks, and even when during the Iraq War, I saw quotes in the paper about Lawrence, because again, he pointed, you can't force people to do things.
Right.
You have to work with them
Yeah.
and get to know them and get to know their language and so forth.
Sounds like a brilliant man. How old was he when he died?
I think he was early 50s, I believe,
Okay.
when he died.
Okay. And is he buried in his hometown? Do you
He's
know?
buried outside of it. I was at
Okay.
just a small grave. Winston Churchill was at his funeral.
Huh.
He corresponded with Churchill. He helped Churchill during the settled the Middle East. He corresponded with the George Bernard Shaw and his wife. He was well known among the intellectual community in Great Britain. Just an amazing man.
That sounds like a very interesting story. It sounds like almost anyone would be able to relate to some part of his life.
Yeah, I think he is. I mean, a lot of people today think he's overrated in many respects. And his book, Seven Pillars, people argue, rightly so, that it's embellished, that some things are just simply wrong. But it's also a book that is written in, how should I put it, superb English, but difficult to read in some cases.
I see. Okay.
I had a professor at Michigan, Middle Eastern history professor, who said, I can't read it. It's just
Out of his realm?
Well, the sentences, like 4 lines for a sentence.
Oh, all right, okay.
Yeah.
So it's just not proper,
comma,
not grammatically correct.
And so forth.
Gotcha. Okay. So. Really kind of an insight into the mind of the man, it sounds like, is writing as he felt. Are any of his relatives still around?
Yes, I think he still has a brother that's alive. I believe, I'm not sure whether he's still alive.
Yeah.
He had 2 other brothers. Of his 5 brothers, 2 were killed in World War I on the Western Front.
Yep.
And he was obviously in Arabia. And the other 2, I'm not sure what. I know one was alive at least 10 years ago. I'm not sure where the other one is.
All right. Well, I hope you have a wonderful presentation here at the library.
It's great. It's great too.
Thanks for stopping by to give us a little preview.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Again, that is the real Lawrence of Arabia presentation from Ray Ajemian on March 17th, 7 to 8:30 p.m. at the Thomas Crane Public Library. Get more information about this or any programs at the library. It's on their website, thomascranelibrary.org.